Hi, my name is Dragon Ding, and today I am joined by Justin in a conversation about video games and their effects on mental health for my Keystone, More Than Just a Game, Understanding the Effects of Gaming on Mental Health, where we'll do a deep dive into Justin's relationship with video games and how they've influenced his life growing up, and in a more recent setting, like how he might be using them to go through the pandemic and whatnot. Justin, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, how you got into gaming, and I guess what you're using games for now.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Justin. I am based out of Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. And I've been a gamer since, well, I guess as far back as I can remember, since about 6, 7 years old. And I kind of first got into gaming because I was a hockey fan. And the first game I ever got was an EA Sports NHL game for my computer. And I remember after school, every day after, obviously, I finished my homework because homework's important, right? After I finished homework, I would just sit on the computer for, 30, 45 minutes every day and just play NHL. And since then, it grew into a whole bunch of different web games, social games, getting my first console, playing Pokemon for the first time, and all of these different, I guess, gaming adventures stuck with me, resonated with me. A lot of my friends played it as well, and it's become a huge part of my life ever since.
Cool. I know you somewhat well. And we
Yeah.
talked a little bit before the session, but you've been doing a lot of work in the esports and gaming industry. Can you
hmm
just, for our viewers, tell us a little bit what the esports and gaming industry looks like and what you've been doing specifically?
Yeah, so the esports and gaming industry is something that's super fast paced. And as much as I enjoy it, there's, at least in Canada, there's a bit of a lack of infrastructure and not so much guidance and proof of concept that's existed beforehand. So it's a huge opportunity to really build on something that, in my case, I'm extremely passionate about, and use my knowledge from community events and previous work experiences with a wide range of different companies, and use that to help build a foundation and reputability for gaming and esports in Canada. So I've been working in the gaming space professionally for about 2.5, 3 years. But prior to that, when there weren't too much opportunities from a volunteer aspect, I've been helping build the gaming and esports community for about 6 years now. So it's really just about sharing that passion and the shared enjoyment of games and the stories behind them and the events that surround them.
Awesome. So there are two things I kind of want to touch upon. The first one will go with your sort of career route. You said you've been doing stuff in esports and gaming for about 6 to 7 years,
Mm.
which, if I remember correctly, should be like about sophomore, junior year of your high school time, or second, third year. I don't know if
Mhm.
Canada uses the
Yeah.
same terms.
So yeah, I started in well, I officially started in late 2014, early 2015, and that was my second year at the University of British Columbia. And that's kind of when I started actually pushing for things. Before then, I was just more of a casual slash competitive gamer where I would play games with my friends with the mindset of we need to win. I
Right.
want to win. I want to be like this famous player who's holding a trophy and winning, at the time, $5,000, and that's a big deal. Uh, and then, within 2, 3 years, went from helping organize events to holding a vice presidential position at the UBC Esports Association for about 3.5 years, where there was a lot more opportunity to help make a change and do more for the space to help it grow.
Right. So I kind of wanted to touch upon that. Most people I don't know if you had any jobs previous to your esports, I guess,
Hmm.
experiences, but most people don't usually think about video games being like the first career option they go into.
Hmm.
Um, so I know you've talked a little bit about how you went from competitive, looks like competitive casual to a more like esports focused sort of mindset about video games. How did that come about? And I guess how did your peers and parents react to that?
Yeah. So, uh, I grew up with a competitive nature, so it was, I guess, only natural for me for when I started enjoying gaming more, uh, to take it more seriously. I played soccer growing up ever since I was 5 years old, even before I started gaming. And it's from 5 years old until like 16, 17, with the exception of 1 year, I played. And during the off season, I got involved with a lot of different sports. In martial arts, I trained in Taekwondo for about 5 years, got my black belt when I was 15 years old. Uh, I was swimming since I was 3 years old, and ended up getting my lifeguard certification when I was 17. Uh, Played Ultimate in high school for 3 years, won a tier two provincial championship. So that competitive nature was always in me. And I got more involved with gaming when I learned that an injury that I was kind of living with, I guess, growing up, basically stopped me from progressing any further in sports.
Mm,
And it wasn't like a big injury; it's something that's pretty common, and it was like a muscular symptom called bilateral compartment syndrome. And without getting too sciency, uh, there are tissues in your calf muscle, in your calves, that hold your muscle all together. And when you work out your muscles start to expand, right? But when you have bilateral compartment syndrome, bilateral meaning in both legs, uh, the tissue can no longer expand. So when you're
mm,
pushing your muscles a bit more, instead of expanding, it does the opposite. It contracts onto your bone. So when you start, working out and things like that, the muscles will start to kind of crush your bones and your shins, right? So because of that, I went through surgery, and because of that, my competitive drive kind of died off for
mm,
actual sports, which is when I started taking esports more seriously. Um, but prior to all of that, you mentioned work experience. Before even thinking about potential future in gaming and esports, my first job was at a local tech retailer, doing sales. Uh, and I worked there for 8 months before the company was shut down countrywide, and then took 2 years off to focus on my education, and then started working with Microsoft on a part-time basis through their retail locations. Uh, and I think that's kind of when I realized that there was more potential to work in gaming. Uh,
mm,
I had a pipe dream in high school of, oh, maybe I want to do game design. Tried that out for a little bit, didn't really stick. Um, but when I joined the Microsoft retail team, uh, they hired me, and what they said was, within the next 6 to 8 months, there's going to be a big focus on gaming.
mm,
Uh, Things like their Xbox, and while the retail stores were still around, pre-pandemic, they would start hosting events, once, twice, 3 times a week. And they said, we want you to help lead that charge at our location.
mm,
And this was in downtown Vancouver. So that's when I really realized that the idea of working gaming, it's serious now. Uh,
mhm,
and that was what, 2017, 2016, something like that. A little bit of a blur, but yeah, that's when I kind of told myself, you know this is a thing. And funnily enough, the when my parents became more accepting of me pursuing gaming and esports as a career was actually when I met you, when we met at the TESPA summer retreat uh, in 2018, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And when they realized, wait, you're getting flown out to California with free accommodation for some video game stuff, huh? And that I just thought that uh, it was kind of funny how that was the turning point. But I'm super thankful for it, and it kind of showed that all the effort that I was putting into university extracurricular was paying off, and there was a point where you could get rewarded for the effort you put into this new space that nobody really understands yet.
So we'll come back to that. I think what's not necessarily surprising to me, but oftentimes gamers aren't really recognized for their athletic abilities. But for you, it seems like you're a very athletic child and a very like person driven by their sports.
Yeah.
I guess so. When after you underwent surgery and you kind of started transitioning your focus from sports to esports, um, that must have been a really big change for you. How did that affect you, like emotionally and mentally, when you realized you couldn't keep pursuing your competitive spirit for sports?
Um, I think it wasn't that I couldn't pursue it. It's more that I realized I enjoyed it and saw more of a future in it compared to traditional sports with gaming and esports. Because when I got the surgery, I was already involved with my university's esports club,
Mm,
uh, and it was it was great because it was in my first year where I had my surgery, and at the time I was just a community member.
right.
And I remember at that time I wanted to try out for the university ultimate team, and it was just the week of the tryouts, couple factors. One, it was like pouring rain, typhoon levels, typical for Vancouver. So that it wasn't like, oh, I don't want to go to the tryout because it's raining. It's like, oh no, really, I have to do this again.
Right.
But the other being, I was walking from the chem building to the physics building, which isn't too far away. It's like a 2 to 3 minute walk. Halfway through that short walk, like I felt a sharp pain in my legs.
Mm,
And the best way to describe it is like, imagine if you had a bruise across the front of your shin and
mhm.
someone was just constantly pressing on that bruise lightly. Uh, so it was like, man, I have all my equipment here, but it's pouring rain. This small walk is giving me trouble. Like,
Right.
I kind of need to rethink it. So, went into esports, and uh, yeah, I guess the one thing that I'm super thankful for having the opportunity to compete in sports growing up, in across a wide variety from team sports to individual sports, uh, is that it helped me build a competitive drive, and that as someone who enjoyed gaming and someone who built a competitive drive all their life, the discovery of esports and seeing who who's the best at a certain game, who can out strategize levels of coaching, analysis, uh, game day performance compared to practice performance. There were a lot of transferable assets that I learned over my, I guess, childhood sporting career and transfer that to my hobby that I was most passionate about. Uh, so, you know, things it starts off with, Pokemon, Super Smash Bros, the classics. And then uh, I started playing League of Legends in 2012. And that was kind of my first experience with, I'll say, an actual esport. And, even today in 2021, 9 years later, I'll still play League of Legends. And it's almost as satisfying, or if not more satisfying, than it was back then. Obviously, I do miss those times for various in-game reasons, but it's still fun. And if you play one game, you try another, and it's easy to access. If you have a computer, it's a low barrier to entry. And I think that's something that's just so wonderful. And one reason why a sport like soccer is so big is because all you need is a
Mm,
ball and a couple sticks. In this scenario for esports, it's all you need is a computer, keyboard, and a mouse, or maybe even not a mouse, a trackpad even.
right.
Uh, and that barrier to entry is just so low for a lot of games, and I absolutely love it.
Let's talk about that. The
Mhm.
low entry to games, esports, casually competitive, whatever sort of level you're looking at.
Mhm.
How do you think that impacts the population, especially throughout the pandemic when, low level entry sports like soccer and basketball have become a lot less available? Like
Mhm.
how do you see the low entry like for video games kind of coming into effect throughout these past couple of years?
Yeah, at least I'll speak from, I guess, excuse me, a very biased Western perspective. Full disclosure, because I'm fortunate enough to live somewhere where having a computer in your house is common.
Right.
Having reliable internet is not unheard of and just as common. So, as someone who's able to open their door and have a computer that has some of the latest hardware and can run almost any program from simple flash games to rendering 3D models in game development programs like Unity. Like, I'm aware that I have that hardware and equipment, but even so, if you have something as simple as a laptop and internet connection at your local coffee shop, uh, you can still do some stuff there. In terms of actually consuming the content of competitive esports, it's more or less free if you have the equipment already, being even a phone, a tablet, which, once again, Western bias, first world country, almost everyone has one.
Mm,
uh, while that may not be the same in a lot more rural areas, which unfortunately I'm a lot less aware about, I don't want to speak on their behalf. uh, it may not be the same. That accessibility may not be the same. But at least in my case in Canada, it's very accessible. Uh, all you have to do is type in a link and bang, it's right there.
right.
Uh, and just watching the competition, watching the personalities. And I think that's something very unique about esports is that, uh, you know, imagine if you could watch LeBron James's practice sessions uh, before his games. You have that opportunity in esports. You have
Hmm.
that opportunity to watch, your favorite player, the best player in the world, play their practice matches, or just, the esports version of street basketball, right? You can watch that anytime uh, for any player around the world. Like even a few days ago, arguably the most famous and by far the most decorated League of Legends player in history, Faker from Korea. As someone in Canada, I can just open my web browser, and if he's broadcasting his practice or his gameplay, I can just tune in without having to pay a dime.
Right.
Uh, Provided, if I'm not including the monthly internet bill and splitting up that time. But it's super easy to just, uh, you know, create a level of a parasocial relationship with these competitive players, and even extending beyond just esports, content creators who are producing, 10, 20, 30-minute videos for people to watch every day on YouTube, which is kind of now my career focus, is helping build these types of networks.
So there are two things I want to talk about. The first one, well, just for full transparency. The first one is I'm gonna go back to our earlier conversation. You talked about growing up. You had this sort of like dream of becoming a professional gamer. I know you said you looked up to specific gamers. I don't know exactly who they are. You can let me know later. The second one, I think a really strong word you use is networking. We often associate that with like businesses, sometimes community, but more so like work stuff. So I'm kind of interested to see your take on how that network might grow into something more. I know we both kind of have a sense of what that looks like in the esports industry. For a lot of people who would see games more as a hobby, it's still kind of confusing. But to talk about sort of the idea of such an accessible network and you growing up looking like up to other gamers, professional esports players, how did that, I guess, impact your development? I know, like, the example you used was what, Michael Jordan?
LeBron James.
LeBron James?
Michael Jordan, same. Like, I won't say same thing. There's a very heated argument about that right now. But what I will say is that they're both very talented basketball players. And for the sake of not starting a war, I will not say who I think is more deserving of the title of greatest of all time. But yeah, when it kind of comes to network, I've actually had kind of had some opportunities to do career talks to high school students about opportunities in gaming and esports. And one common misconception I found from not just them, but their parents who were in attendance was, oh, the only thing in professional gaming is being the player, right? So this person who wants to, or my son, my daughter, they say they want a career in esports. Like, how can they have a career in esports when everyone else is going for it? Maybe they aren't the most talented gamer, or if they kind of understand what they're doing. But careers in esports, I like to compare it as more or less a parallel to any traditional sports league, right? So, sticking, if we want to stick on theme with the NBA, or if we want to go to the NHL, like, it's kind of the same idea where each team has its structure. They have their players, but behind the players, they have their coaching staff. There's a head coach, assistant coach. There are personal trainers. There are analytics. There are equipment staff. And in the case of esports, that equipment staff is IT opportunities, which are specialized in things like servers and cloud computing and stuff like that. So it extends beyond just the playing opportunity. And at times it even extends into linguistics, translators, which is something super important because it's a global phenomenon, not a regional phenomenon. And because, very specific example being that Korea has had a developed esports scene for a long time. They've had government support for esports since the days of StarCraft 2. And because of that, and how the training regimen and how esports jobs have developed there, a lot of professionals, whether they're players or support staff, administrative, whatever it may be, are from Korea. And because esports is an industry that's growing in North America, language is one of the biggest barriers to communication. And translator jobs are very important in the space. But even beyond that, nutrition, you can be an esports chef. Like, as weird as that sounds, teams hire professional chefs to create proper diets and proper meals for their players because they have such a unique work schedule where, it feels like a lot more serious of an office job where, they're sitting at their computer for, 6 hours at a time before they can go meet their team's personal trainer to make sure that they stay in shape for both physical health and mental health. Because it is important to, get the blood flowing and make sure that your body's in good health. And there's been a lot of studies that have shown that those who are in better physical health in the gaming space also perform better when it comes to competition. Uh, so the careers in esports extend beyond just the players, and I think that runs in parallel with career opportunities in traditional sports. If you want to become a player agent, if you want to become a marketer for a team, all of those opportunities exist in the space of esports. And I think that's really where the network comes down to, is that, you know, everyone you meet is a potential new opportunity. And everyone has a different skill set. And if you want to apply your skill set to something that's more esports focused, you can do that. I still do believe that having a level of education is extremely important. Whether you want to be an esports athlete or working professional salary man at a job, uh, education is always important. It's great for personal growth and personal development, and just the types of routines you develop through formal education just really help in terms of understanding the situation and learning how to grow.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, I mean, I know it is pretty awesome about how like broad the esports spectrum is, especially as the industry grows. But
Mm-hmm.
something you hear a lot of times alongside the growth of esports industry is the kind of more dark topics, whether that be sexual harassment, burnout, overworked hours, things like that. Let's take it one at a time. So you talked a lot about mental and physical health and nutritionists and just making sure that like you're doing the right things to keep yourself at your peak performance. Can you talk about mental health specifically within the esports industry and the ideas of burnout and overwork, whether you're a competitive gamer or someone working on game design?
Yeah, that is something that, in terms of overwork and burnout, uh, I've experienced and am experiencing right now,
Mm-hmm.
mostly because it's something I'm just so passionate about. Where, there really isn't a punch clock for when you're on and off the clock if you're working in the space. If you have time to practice, as I mentioned previously, accessibility. You're a couple clicks away from hopping into game and practicing if you're a player.
Right.
And I think that's one big thing, and why a lot of teams hire team psychologists is just to kind of help with that. I guess it's weird to say this, but a work-life balance when your work is games and previously your life balance was gaming as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what it's kind of creating a bit of a disconnect when your number one hobby, being gaming, becomes your career. Uh, that kind of becomes, your 24/7 more or less. Uh, when you're off the clock, what your number one passion is, especially during, COVID-19 pandemic times, is I can't go outside. I'm gonna, open up a game on my computer and play. I'm gonna
Right.
try something new. Um, and as I said, convenience and accessibility. Uh, it takes me 10 seconds to open up League of Legends right now. If I wanted to hop in game, I'd be in one in less than a minute.
Right.
And it convenience and accessibility. It's the same reason why a lot of people use food delivery services instead of going to a restaurant themselves. It's easier. Uh,
Mm.
it saves them time, uh, and at the end of the day, I think that's one big reason why there's a lot of burnout, is because it's easily accessible for those who are already engaged. Um, but also, sometimes I like to say there's good stress and bad stress. And in my case, working in a very heavy startup environment, uh, there's a lot of good stress because it's something that I'm working towards and something that I'm passionate about. But, I'll be thinking about this project until, well, not until I go to bed. Sometimes I even dream about it, to a point where you can't really escape your work. And if your work is
Mhm.
gaming, it's a really weird seesaw that you're living with.
I guess I'm curious to hear more about how you find that balance. Then you're
Mhm.
for you, because it is a startup, as you said. I'm sure there's a lot of challenges you have to face, and almost like a minute by minute scenario, or you
Mhm.
see something, you have to fix it immediately. But also because of the pandemic and not being able to go outside, how have you been able to utilize gaming as a hobby and work, and like how have you, I guess, balanced your mental health in that sort of sense?
Yeah, so I think actually the most effective thing was I started playing a new game that I never played before. None of my friends played before, um, but I've heard good things about. And it's a game called Hades, developed
Mm,
by Supergiant Studios. And I'm like, oh, let's try this. It's not naturally a competitive game where you're playing against other people from around the world. So I started playing it. I really enjoyed it, and something I've known about for a while is speedrunning. So I'm like, okay,
mm,
let's try speedrunning this game. And there was a time where, or I still think even now, for a specific category, I'm actually the top Canadian runner for that game.
oh,
For I believe Hades 3 weapon speedrun, where you clear the game 3 times in a row with 3 different classes, more or less. Uh, I cleared it in around 57 minutes. And the world record right now, that clear was like 2 months ago. It's been a while, but the world record for that is about 47 minutes. So I think
mm,
globally right now it's around 22 or something like that. But it was it was good for me because it was something where I could just disconnect from my usual gaming, disconnect from work because nobody else was playing that game. There wasn't really um, it was something that I could bring new stories to, especially since my friend circle is very gaming oriented. Talking about new games and new experiences within games is very common. Uh, you
mm,
know, um, when our workplaces open back up for offices with distancing guidelines and stuff like that, we'd walk into work and we'd talk about all these new and different games we played. And even just recently, early access for Pokemon Unite, a multiplayer game on your phone. And it's just been very refreshing to play new games. It's kind of like trying out a new sport and seeing whether or not you enjoy it. Uh, you know, like for me, I'm not great at basketball. I'm not that tall of a person.
mm.
uh, you know, as someone who's 5'6", 5'7", basketball is something that can be difficult because
Hmm.
it's stereotypically a very tall sport. Uh, so it's kind of the same idea where you may enjoy one game more so than another, and you can have that conversation or argument or legal case against your peers and colleagues in saying why you're right as to why your game is better and theirs is worse. Uh, and obviously, that's all opinion based, but
Right.
uh, you know, gaming with mental health has definitely been a plus for me. Uh, through pandemic and even through uh, previous experiences with clinical depression. And it's been something that has helped me move forward personally and has, at least in my very first person bias perspective, has been one of the best things for me.
If you'd be comfortable sharing, could you tell us a little bit more about your clinical depression and what that entailed?
Mhm. Yeah. So it was in 2015, 2016, where something wasn't really feeling right,
Mm,
and there were a lot of circumstantial things happening. Uh, I noticed my grades at school were slipping. I was noticing that I wasn't really finding too much enjoyment out of really anything. In first year at university, I didn't have many friends. A lot of my friends from high school moved out of the city, the province, state, country. So it was
Mm-hmm.
really difficult to stay in touch with them. So my first year, I would go to school, take these boring physics and calculus classes that I wasn't really enjoying, and wasn't really doing well at either. And then once that was done, I would just jet home so that I could go to work and, make a couple extra dollars so that I could pay for tuition.
Right.
And that was more or less my first year in a nutshell, aside from, maybe one or two times out of the month, I would be able to spend a couple hours playing some games with some old high school friends who somehow managed to not have any midterms or homework assignments, which seemed to happen like every other day. So, uh, and it was also that year that I learned my mother was diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And it was also that year that there were other health issues discovered within my family. Uh, and, that was, that's a lot of weight for sure.
Mm.
But at the time, my mental state was more, it is what it is, as weird as that sounds, but it wasn't dismissive. It was more hiding the fact that it was something serious.
Right.
Uh, and it was in my second year, and it was actually out of everything that could have broken me, it wasn't learning about the family health issues, which probably should have been the breaking point. But it was a thermodynamics and mechanodynamics course
Mm.
that I was taking that absolutely broke me. Um, I During that course, halfway through, I was at, what was it? I think it was like a 15%.
Mm.
Like it broke me. I wasn't doing well in the course. I couldn't find the energy to actually put towards doing the course because it felt like I couldn't really go anywhere. And that's really what broke me. So it was the straw that broke the camel's back. So all of
Mm.
these built up emotions from first year stress, all these built up emotions from family health situations, my personal health situations, as I mentioned earlier, my injury and upcoming surgery, like all of that just kind of built up, and yeah, it kind of broke there. But I during all of that time, I noticed that the times that I could see myself smiling a bit more, feeling a little bit more accomplished, was, you know, I was playing League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm at the time.
Mm.
Those were the times where I felt that, I was doing something right. Something as small as the dopamine hit you would get from seeing victory on your screen. Something like that just kind of made you feel a bit more accomplished. Uh, and it kind of put aside all of the negative auras and feelings that you would get for just that temporary, 20, 30, 40 minutes that you would be playing the game. And yeah, that's really what where gaming really helped me out, was it kind of provided me an escape. It
Mm.
wasn't the only thing that I did to kind of work through depression at the time. Uh, I sought professional help, and my parents were thankfully very understanding of it, and I can't stress that enough. Having supportive parents for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if they weren't supportive about it, it would likely be a very different situation.
Sure.
Like I might not be as open to talking about it. There may have been some more negative experiences, but thankfully they were very understanding, and we talked with our family practitioner, got in touch with a professional therapist who was a huge help. And I can't stress this enough. At least in my case, having a good therapist makes a world of difference. If it wasn't for that, uh, I don't know how. Like, how much longer it would have taken for me to fight it, if I
Mm,
could even fight it. Um, but yeah, I guess kind of cycling back in regards to mental health, it was a battle that I discovered in 2015, 2016. But in reality, it never goes away. There will still be times, even nowadays, where my alarm will go off when I have to go to work, but I just don't want to leave my bed. I'll be stuck in my bed until 5 p.m., 6 p.m., even though my alarm went off at 8 a.m.
right.
Right? And just that lack of energy that still exists. And, you know, as sad as it sounds, there may not even be a cure for depression, but the best way to, um, I guess, cure it is learn how to fight it in different ways. Learn what helps you move through it. And talking about it was one of the biggest ones for me. As I said, the therapist I was working with really helped talk me through what I'm going, why I'm feeling certain ways, what certain triggers may be, and this whole idea of self reflection and being a fly on the wall of your own mind. Um, Things like that just really helped me look at things a lot more analytically. And I guess this might just be a me thing, but I took a philosophy course during university about existentialism,
Mm,
which a lot a lot of people say it's a very negative outlook, but to me, as weird as it sounds, it resonated with me and it helped me understand what I was going through more. Oddly enough, something so that can be seen as a lot more pessimistic of philosophy helped me be more positive about my own.
mm,
So it's weird how things like that end up working. And existential crises are often looked upon as a negative thing, but for me, I guess this existential crisis helped me. So
yeah,
it's different for everyone, and everyone's story is different. How everyone fights their own personal battles, it's always going to be different. There is no, at least from what I've experienced, and some friends who were um, open enough about their struggles with mental health as well. Um, when they talk with me and their struggles, I've never heard the same story twice.
mm,
And I think that's something that's important with mental health is that it's not the same. There is no cure all. Everyone's experience will be different, and that means there's going to be different solutions and different methods for every other person.
for sure. I think the thing you said about existential, sort of that concept of,
Yeah.
you using your like that sort of like negative energy and like flipping it to positive actually makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of
Yeah.
times people only start seeking mental health when they hit rock bottom and they just can't put up with it anymore. And I don't know if it's the exact same vein or if it's like exactly parallel, but kind of the same sort of energy, I guess.
Yeah, it wasn't really rock bottom. Like if it wasn't for my supportive parents, I can't stress this enough. My parents were super supportive through this whole thing. If it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't have sought help.
Mm,
But they were just really concerned. They knew the importance of mental health even before I did, um,
mm,
funnily enough. And they're like, okay, we're like, let's set up a doctor's appointment, uh, and we need to figure this out because you're in your second year of school. You don't necessarily know. At that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do for work as a career.
right.
Uh, because I was taking physics, but I didn't like it. I wasn't doing well, but I was at this point where my overall average was. I wasn't failing overall. Like there were a couple courses that I did end up failing, withdrawing from,
Sure.
but my overall average was still a passing grade, but it was too low to transfer out of the program. So I was stuck in this physics purgatory when it came to education.
Mm,
So my opportunity to try something else wasn't there, but my I guess my cop out card also wasn't there. So yeah, as I said, if it wasn't for my parents, uh, I probably wouldn't be as open or even had the opportunity to fight it for sure.
Mm-hmm. On the topic of supportive parents, I know you said that it was only after the test retreat or that sort of period your parents became more accepting of your kind of like gaming pursuits.
Mhm,
But it sounds like you've been pretty interested in gaming since you were a child.
mhm.
So I guess growing up with them, what was their stance on your gaming habits? And in the same vein of like being supportive parents helping you through your mental struggles, how did that kind of impact your growth and development as you kind of worked through that's
Yeah,
those parental conflicts?
yeah. So, as a kid in elementary school, when I kind of had my first exposure to gaming, um, it was always as long as your homework is finished,
Mm,
you can play maximum 2 hours, right? And it was very strict. And for me, at that time, 2 hours was great. I could play Pokemon for 2 hours, and then that's the perfect time because right after that, hey, look, the Canucks game is on. I'll just watch that now.
mm,
And we'd sit down for dinner, and then, I might have swimming classes, I might have taekwondo, I might have soccer practice, whatever it may be. There was always something there through elementary school, and as I got into high school, it was around, I think, like grade 10, grade 11. I was, humble brag, disclosure here, but I was one of the top three students in my class in
mm,
high school, and homework wasn't a problem for me. My marks, not a problem at all.
right.
Uh, so my parents were a lot more lenient. At During that time, I was more or less done with my martial arts in terms of training because my injury was picking up around
Mm,
that time. Uh, I still had soccer, twice a week, which was just important for my physical health and something I wanted to push through. Uh, and it was once again that thing. As long as you're done your homework, it's do whatever you want in moderation.
mm-hmm.
And I think that in moderation part is the important piece
Sure.
with my parents' upbringing. Now, obviously, there were times where I'd go over 2 hours and they'd be like, Justin, what are you doing? Like, don't you have anything better to do? And, you know, my parents are the furthest thing from gamers. In terms of personal interests and everything, I would say my parents are the complete opposite of me. For me, my
Mm,
personal interests are, gaming, esports, traditional sports. I have like 10 different fantasy leagues set up on my phone
uh-huh.
across different sports. My parents, it's, you know, they can barely sit through a single hockey game,
Mm,
right? Without being bored out of their mind. Um, they'll maybe be interested in like 1 minute out of the 60 minutes being played,
right.
right? So, our personal interests are polar opposites. So that's one of the big reasons why there was, I guess, a lack of understanding of the gaming space. And also that onus is kind of on me as well because there wasn't that learning opportunity of being like, why don't you play this with me? It was,
Mm,
I want to do this because this is me time, not us time. Our us time is dinner, and then I want my me time.
right.
And as for me, me time was being a single child. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that has a big thing to do with it as well, in terms of, uh, you know, the circumstances being raised as an only child is very different than someone who has, a twin or a younger brother, older brother, younger sister, older sister,
Right.
multiple siblings, right? Uh, it's very different because, there's this kind of false spotlight on yourself as you're being presented as, at least in my case, my parents always presented me as like the poster child for our extended family.
Right.
And I don't remember if I embraced that or detested that growing up. I think I was just impartial to it
Mm.
because it was, yeah, I'm the best kid in our family, but I'm also the only kid, so that also makes me the worst kid in the family.
That's
Like,
true.
so it's the two sides of the coin.
Right.
But yeah, I think I got a little bit off track there,
That's okay.
but yeah, like my parents, even today don't understand gaming. Um, but they understand that it's the space that I'm working in. It's the space I've been, pushing myself to work in for the last 5, 6 years.
Right.
And, now I like to think that I'm getting rewarded for all that hard work. But at the same time, it's still a growing industry. It's very volatile. There's a lot of people who try to get in the space, invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into trying to create something, and then within 3 months, it just disappears,
Mm.
right? And I think that volatility uh, is something that is warranting of a bit of concern. So, it's something that I am enjoying, uh, and something that if it were to work out, let's say in 5 to 10 years from now, it would have been the best career move of my life. But obviously, we can't see into the future. We just have to
Right.
push ourselves to create the best solution that we can for whatever problem we're trying to solve. And going back onto your topic of burnout, yeah, their burnout does exist for sure.
Mm. So I'm at times very narrow-minded, and
Mhm.
I often kind of blame the older generation for not trying to understand video games. But what you said is really interesting, or you said there was like a personal onus that you didn't help your parents understand video games because it was your you time, your me time.
Mhm.
Um, I guess as someone who works in the industry and probably can much better explain it to anyone, like probably better than me by a long shot, how would you communicate with the older generation and help them like guide them towards your understanding of what the esports gaming industry is like, and kind of like show them about the potential, about all the different careers you can take, about even though like there might be burnout, you can, it helps with depression and like all these different things.
Mhm.
The floor is yours. There's so many things to
Yeah.
talk about.
So actually, just funny story. I just remembered how it got to the stage of why I didn't teach my parents why I enjoyed gaming, and I
Mm.
remember exactly why. It's so this is so embarrassing, but uh, it was Pokemon Emerald save file I had on my Game Boy Advance,
Great game.
and to this day, it is my favorite game of all time. To this day, um, and I remember coming home from soccer practice one day,
Mm.
and I saw my dad on my save file, and I was livid. and now that I think about it, I think that's actually the reason why my parents didn't want to learn about gaming. It's because
Uh,
I was so livid that my dad was on my save file. And I was like, you're ruining it. Don't do this. And this was like 8-year-old me just being like, Dad, no, stop. But yeah, so going back to the how to explain different opportunities, um, as someone who grew up and still am a fan of the traditional sports space, been a hockey fan all my life primarily. Uh, the structure's the same. Uh,
mm.
you know, in the NHL, you'll have your league commissioner. The league commissioner will have their executives who help them with the decision making process. You'll have your wide variety of teams. In the NHL, there's 31 teams now. Each team has their own general manager, their own scouts, their own coaching staff. I haven't even mentioned the players yet.
Right.
There's so many opportunities in that. Even when it comes to even just watching the game, You have your broadcasters, you have your producers, your cameramen, your photographers, your journalists. They're all doing an occupation with, you know, what I would say to them are real life tasks, because of very common belief that gaming isn't real life. It's a
Mm,
hobby. There's no career opportunity out of a hobby where you just sit down at your computer. While your an office job is sitting down at a computer with spreadsheets for 8 hours.
that's true.
My office job might be sitting down at a computer for 8 hours working with spreadsheets, but the content of the spreadsheets aren't necessarily company finances and budgeting. My spreadsheet might be statistical analysis of different positions on an XYZ axis and plane,
Mm,
where certain players may be at a certain time in order for them to create more advantages in order to achieve victory.
right.
It's a different application of the same skill sets that you would find in a lot of uh, typical 9 to 5 jobs that are that resonate a lot with the older generation. So once I start to draw all of these different comparisons of the traditional sports idea of like and as I said previously, LeBron James or even Michael Jordan, if you could watch them just play some street ball in their backyard, how many people do you think would tune in to watch that type of thing with someone with such a big name?
Mm,
And there would be a lot of following for that. But who are the people that enable that? There needs to
right.
be a camera person there to help make sure that the broadcast is being streamed. And that's the same thing with esports. I would think that, even argue that these esports players have more than just their competitive skill set. They have the skill set for broadcasting. They're the ones who
Mm,
are managing their own production and interacting with their community. And I think one of the best things I heard from someone was uh, that, as simple as it may seem for someone just to play games in front of an audience, when it comes to live streaming, imagine you're throwing a house party, right?
okay.
But you aren't necessarily inviting your own guests. These guests just walk through your door. You don't know who they are,
Mm,
but you know what your job is? Keep them entertained for 6 hours straight.
right.
But you don't know who they are. You don't know their background, or at least not yet. But here's the thing, if they aren't entertained, they walk away, they
Mm,
leave. So now instead of 10 people, maybe you're down to 9 or 8 or 7. And you need to keep up that energy for, 4 or 5 hours at a time if you're an online broadcaster. And, for me, you know, I can barely keep someone entertained for an hour or two until, I pull out the good old nice weather we're having, eh? You know?
yeah.
So there are it there are some very specific difficulties in the space as well, but professionally, when I'm presenting the new industry of esports to older generations who aren't really endemic to the space, um, there's a giant career sheet, like a brainstorm that I use, where it shows about 70 different jobs that you
Mm,
can have in esports. Only one of them is player,
mm,
right? There's over 60 other uh, jobs on there that aren't gaming. They're accountants, they're managers, they're marketing specialists, they're production specialists, AV techs, IT techs. All of those exist in order to put on one event.
mm,
And when you see these companies putting on like 2 to 3 events a week,
right.
that's a lot of manpower and technical skill that's needed. Um, and whether you're a nutritionist, journalist, computer scientist, physicist, business professional, whatever it may be, if you are passionate about esports, the great thing is, since it is an underdeveloped industry right now, in Canada at least, you can create your own job in this space if you see value and benefit to the overall image.
Right.
So if if you're if you're I don't know, like if you're a chemist, right? If you really think about it, there isn't really anything endemic to a chemist being a professional in esports, right? Like, what type of molecular structure and full disclosure, I am not a chemist, so I'm probably using a lot of these words poorly. But you know, molecular structures and everything. What does that have to do with right clicking on a screen and dealing a little bit of damage to your opponent, or shooting a virtual weapon in Overwatch, right?
Sure.
Where's the correlation? But it's kind of the problem solving process that you learn through chemistry uh, that you can use towards real life applications. How can we solve this problem of we're always hitting a barrier here, whether it's organizational or in game? Here's a barrier. Here's my train of thought, and this is why I think this way. I'm
Hmm.
more of a logical thinker compared to someone who might be more of an empathetical thinker
Right.
based on emotions. Uh, I've noticed that a lot of people who study the sciences are a lot more stat and analytic based, very logical. Um, so just having a different perspective uh, can be very beneficial to any job that doesn't necessarily have to do with, combining some sodium ions with some chloride ions.
Yeah. I like to use salt, by the way.
Thanks.
Out of
Subtle, right?
all
Subtle,
the
right?
different chemistry things, you could have used NaCl.
uh,
Okay, we're running a bit short on time. There's one question I like asking everyone.
mhm.
What is your favorite game of all time? Which you already told me the answer to, but why?
Yeah, so Pokemon Emerald for sure, Gen 3. And the biggest reason why was that was the game I put the most hours into. It's the one I remember the
Mm,
most. Uh, you know, growing up watching Pokemon as a kid, I loved the show.
mhm.
Admittedly, I still love the show. Uh, there are still new episodes.
That's
Uh,
crazy.
Pokemon became a thing when I was born. We were both born in 96. So it's something that I've grown up with. Uh, it, and as a kid, this was also around the time where I started grasping the idea of stories in games.
Mm,
Before that, I would play Sonic the Hedgehog, but all I would do is press right and press A when I saw I needed to jump. I
right.
didn't understand any overarching story. But the storytelling for Generation 3 of Pokemon, be it Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, um, it was a great story. I got my first shiny Pokemon in that game. Uh, I got my first level 100 Pokemon in that game. I had my first link battles with my friends during that game, and it felt like at the time the possibilities were endless. It felt like such an open world and sandbox that I could explore.
Mm,
Uh, and just overall, there wasn't any fault I could see in the game at that time. And even today, if I'm being picky, uh, it's tough for me to say that there was something wrong about the game. So that's why it's my favorite game of all time, Pokemon Emerald. And needless to say, with all the new Pokemon games coming out, as a fan of the entire, you know, Pokemon company, uh, it's exciting. It
for
always
sure.
feels fresh, despite what seems to be a very negative community reaction. Like,
Yeah.
don't knock it till you try it. Uh, Obviously, not everyone can be the best game of all time, and I think that's why Pokemon Emerald is mine. It just feels like a classic,
Mm.
and uh, it also has the storyline is actually based on a true story, but that's like I learned that on a 50-minute documentary, so I won't go into that one yet.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing so much. I learned a lot about how the esports industry works, how to talk to other people. Um, we learned, I personally learned a lot about balance, work life, everything. So thanks for sharing and thanks for joining me today.
Of course, more than happy to. Thanks, Dragon.